We looked at the find command, which helped us look for files and maybe do one particular action on a whole group of files. So for example, you can look in a directory or a bunch of directories for image files that have a certain name or that are newer than a certain time, and for example delete them or convert them to some other format, things like that, with just one command. Okay, so I hope you had a chance to play with the find command. Next we will look at two commands called cut and paste, and I mentioned that they might not work exactly as you would expect. So the thing about cut is that cut works with a group of lines in a file that look somewhat similar, so that if you want to extract, for example, an entire column, like let's say all of the first names in a file, cut is a good command to do that. Or if you want to look at all the second name or last names of in a file, you can do that. Or if you just want to extract all of the telephone numbers or emails of, and I'm just using this as an example, and that's what the book uses too. Okay, so you can what cut is used for is to extract essentially columns of data in a file. Okay, so suppose you have this file full of people's names, phone numbers, and emails. You can do, for example, this. You can say cut the first field. Now, this may not do exactly what you expect. You might think, well, the first field is just the name, right? Well, by default, cut works with things that are separated by tab characters. That's the default. You can change the default, but by default, it only works with tab characters. So this means that if you have a tab between the last name and the telephone number, then it tells cut that this whole thing is the first field. And similarly, if there's a tab over here, it says that this whole thing is the first field of the second line, and so on. That's why you would get something like this. So I've tried to set up my own example. Just made up some names. I called it phones too, and let's just VI this to make sure that it's in the right format. Okay, so I'm going to use the arrow key. Here's the name. There's a space here. And then when I get to here, I'll hit one arrow and it takes me all the way there, indicating that it is a tab character right there. And then I put spaces in between the numbers and then a tab after the last number. So this is a tab right here. This is a tab right here after the last name. So I did the same thing here. I hope I did the right thing. Because if I mess that up, then cut gets messed up too. And I did this all, I just typed it in by hand. I made a mistake. I think I haven't. That looks okay. So everything looks good. I got names, first name, space, last name, tab, and then the telephone number. All 10 digits with the parentheses, and then a tab after that, and then email. And I hope I got all that right. We'll find out. So, cut doesn't actually modify the file. It just extracts data. So, let's say I want the first field in this file called phones. And sure enough, it worked. Just like in the book in the example, it gives me both the first name and the last name. Okay, so that's how it's supposed to work, and it looks like it worked exactly like it should. Now you can change the default delimiter. So by default, the delimiter that cut uses is the tab character. You can use spaces, for example, as the delimiter. So for example, let's try some of these other things. You can cut the first and the third fields, which would mean name and email, I believe. Let's try that. 1, 3, and it works. You don't have to stick with just the fields. You can use characters, and that comes in handy in some places. So you can cut the first two through the 10th characters. Let's see what that will give us. Let's just try something a little bit more obvious. Let's try the first through the third characters. Okay, that worked. Let's try the first and third characters. That worked too. Okay, so try this out. The best way to learn this is to actually try out these different commands, try the different options. And it looks like so far we have everything worked out. You don't have to use files. For cut, you can use output of commands like date or ls. So let's just try that. Let's say date, date. And here's something that you might not have seen before. I don't remember if I've tried this, if I've shown this to you. You take the output of date and put that into the input of cut. You use this character that's right above your enter key, I believe. It is on my keyboard. So date, and it's called a pipe character. Date space pipe character space cut minus F1. Oh, there are no tabs in here, so F1 doesn't do much. That's interesting. Let's try cut 1 through 4th. That's not so interesting either. Let's try the 5th. So that should give you FRI space J. There it is. Okay. You can use the ls. Now date is not all that interesting because it's just one line. ls should give us more. And that's not terribly interesting either. Let's try ls minus l. So ls minus l ordinarily will give us all of that. And if you use that with cut, okay, it will take the first through the 6th character, so it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you should see a minus RW, minus RW. Sure enough, there it is. And also you see this one line that says total, which we usually tend to ignore, but you don't want to ignore that. Okay, so a couple more things to try. Try 1 through 10. That works too. That gives you all the permissions, and you can, for example, leave out the first character and you can take just the permissions. That comes in handy sometimes. Okay. Another thing that you can do is use a different delimiter than tab using the -D option. So let's go back to the phones example. Okay, so there's our cutting of fields 1 through 3. And let's try cut minus just the first field, but now with a new delimiter, which is the space. Now what this will do is extract the first name and not treat the first name and the second name as one thing. So if you want just the first name, you want to use a different delimiter. You want to use that space as the delimiter. Why is this? Because when I set up this phones, I used a space here, and cut by default works with tabs, and I put tabs between the names and the numbers. Okay, so if I want to use space as the delimiter and I want the first and the second name, I wish I should do something like this. Use the first two fields. Oh, but now I ended up with the tab, not considered a delimiter, so now that's going to be a problem. Okay, so I guess I cannot do the first and the last name with space as the delimiter. I just have to go back to this if I want the full names. So once you start using space as the delimiter, the tab is no longer recognized as a delimiter. And so if you try to get the first two fields, this is the first field, and all of this is the second field, unfortunately now. So, okay, so that's how it's supposed to work, that's how it does work. You can go by characters, you can spell it out, minus minus character, minus minus delimiter, or minus D, either one. Okay, so suppose you have two files with the same number of rows. You can join them together or paste them together. So paste doesn't work exactly like you would expect. I don't know what you expect actually, but a lot of people say that when they first use paste, it's not exactly what they expected. Okay, so how can you use this? So for example, let's cut minus F, the first, let's get the names of everybody, and we can redirect the output into a file called names. Okay, let's take a look. Cat names, it has the names, good. Now I can cut all the emails out, minus F, I believe it's 3 phones. Okay, there are all the emails. Now I can repeat that and put it into emails. Now I have phones, names, and emails. Let me check. Alright, and now I can paste names. Oh, let's try the other way around. Emails, names, and what I get is the email of a person followed by their name, and then I can take the output of that, save it into my email list. Alright. If I cat my email list, I see emails and then names. So that was a lot of commands to type in. You know, of course it can be a lot simpler. We did it the long way. So paste just puts two columns of data together. You can change the delimiter just like you can with cut. And the rest of this chapter, I believe, is just looking at the more command, which is just like the page command, but only different. Let's take a quick look at that. There's nothing, no big files in here. So I'll cd to my home directory, where I know there is a member from way back. There's a file called bashrc.bashrc. So if you cat it, it's a huge file, goes off the top of the terminal. What you can do is, instead of catting it, you can say more.bashrc. It works just like the page command, except that a couple of things are different. So here's the beginning of the file. It shows you, in this case, it shows you the first 20% or the first fifth of the file, and it's waiting for you to hit the spacebar. Unlike the page command where you have to hit enter, you can actually hit enter, you'll go line by line. But if you want to go page by page, you hit the spacebar. Eventually you get out. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to more. We'll take a look at a couple of other commands like this and finish out this chapter.